Rest in peace, Bob Hawke, who just passed away a couple of days ago. And the election was held yesterday, and Liberal has won, announced this morning. Now, before I get into Bob Hawke, let's just go through, a bit of like these flyers been going around for the last couple of weeks. So we've got the Labour Party. There you go. Jordan, who apparently stepped down as the leader of the Labour. Got the animal rights as well. The Greens, they came third. I think they had 10%. 10% of the votes. The Greens. The Socialist Party. The Liberals, who won. Which I don't find why. But out of all of them, I think this will be the highlight of the election. Which apparently he got stepped down. Didn't want any. This will be remembered because for the last 6 months, we've been driving around, going through YouTube or watching the TV commercials. All we've been seeing is Make Australia Great Again. But out of all the flyers, I think this one is a lot more appealing. I don't know why. It's the yellow, it's the black. Simplified, but it looks a lot more appealing. But sadly, he didn't want enough votes. Yeah, I'm not going to see him very soon anymore. Fraser Anning lost the seats as well. So that's a bit of history for me to look back on this video. Okay, so rest in peace to Bob Hawke. Bob Hawke and Keating era, which is the Labour Party. Now, I wasn't born during that time until his end of Prime Minister. Now, all I do know in my schooling years is his gold beers. And as well, he opened his arm and brought Chinese immigrants to Australia. Now, during that time, that would be 1989. That was literally towards his end of his presidency's Prime Minister, and allowed many of them, the Tiananmen Square 1989, apparently I think it's 3 months or 100 days of protests in Tiananmen Square for democracy and voice for China. And Bob Hawke has made the speech very teary and opened his arms and brought the Chinese in. Now, I know Chinese people are getting a bad reputation in current 2019. Either from the country or the people, they're getting a bad rap, as we have known for buying lots of houses and keep them empty, and manipulating with the real estate prices for many local Australians could not afford. And now with Clive Palmer, who mentioned about what's going on with Chinese government and the CCP government, what they're trying to do in Australia. So there's a very, very negative stereotype in the Chinese community at the moment. Now, all I can say is that mainly those who do this sort of stuff is usually a government or usually high official or usually those who hasn't been brought to Australia for a very long time. Even those who are help work aligned with them, there is, but we're not the majority of them. We have ones that have been brought up in Australia. We don't think that way. You got the others who brought their sort of heritage and sort of mindset thinking. Chinese is a very, very complex way of thinking, the way how they think. Even myself, I can't even draw the dots, connect the dots, to be honest. Now, well, one of the concerning part about the Tiananmen massacre is, I know it's very, very political correct. It's very, very sensitized in China. But it creates a huge wave across China. And why Bob Hawke and many Western countries opened their arms and collecting many Chinese students, or it was a phase of having them to be safe and secure until their Chinese regime, toned down or safe to go back. Now, during that time, my parents would never had the opportunity until that massacre has event. Now, my parents did not get engaged when they were in China. They met through the same plane, the court. Apparently, they're sitting next to each other, and somehow they went to the same classes together. And I think it was international studies or trade studies or tourism or travel. It was one of the categories. Many of the Chinese people who comes to China during that era, which is which is the 88 or 89 or the early 90s, is the fact that you have to be very rich, or you have to have a lot of money, and as well you need a translator to translate into English for them to come to Australia to order to get, So it's sort of like asylum seeker, or refugee, but it's more asylum seeker because they opened their arms. My parents wasn't in the protests at all. It was an eye opportunity for Chinese people to go out the world where it's not illegal. So many of them has paid lots of money to fly to Australia. My parents have worked their ass off, and they're still committed to what it is today. Now, my mother's been voted for Labor for entire life because of the fact that the Bob Hawke and the Keating era has accepted my mother. But this year's election, she has voted for Liberal because of of her child, my sister's circumstance, of more of the education side. So my mother was a long-term supporter of Labor. And today I can say the fact that if it wasn't for Bob Hawke, I wouldn't be here. I wouldn't be in Australia. My parents named me William, as you guys know, Prince William. My parents didn't deliberately name me a Chinese name because they feared that they may kick them out of the country. Instead of that, they named me William. Many of them who chose that route to be getting married or forced married or having a child just to secure to getting the permanent residency or the citizenship, because when my parents came, or many Chinese came to Australia, was temporary visa. Now, when it's under temporary visa, it was many things has happened. Now you have that. Not only just Hawke just introduced with the Chinese, but also has large migrant flows of Indo-Chinese as well. So it can be part of the Vietnam or somewhere the Southeast Asia. So if it wasn't for him, many Chinese immigrants wouldn't came. A large wave of Chinese immigrant wouldn't able to come. Now, many of them who came during that year is usually husband or wife, or one of them, or they send their daughters or their son, and after a couple of years they brought their family or their marriage couples to Australia. So during that time, it wasn't a large amount of, it was probably like 20 or 30,000 or something around there. And after that, it boomed, skyrocketed to 100 something thousand. Apparently, at the moment, it's I think 1.2 million Chinese in Australia at the moment. I'm not sure is that included with the students or not, but it creates a huge effect in Australia, which today we see a lot of Chinese businesses is successfully going around. They will have our own banks, we have our own grocery stores, we have our own fast food, we have everything on our own. So it was, if I had to say integrated properly or not, it was still better off. Okay, there's many of us around. But all I can say, Bob Hawke opened that opportunity to many of them, especially those who's coming from the Guangdong province, the Hong Kong province as well. The Hong Kong people came a lot earlier. because they were under the British Empire. So it was a way of them. Many of them wants to come to Australia. My parents has worked many jobs. My father worked 2-3 jobs in a week, and he has opened a lot, because during that time in China communist, you're not allowed to date and have girlfriend or boyfriend. You're supposed to get married. So when my dad got my mum pregnant, it's pretty much married. And at that time, there were a lack of education, right, in China. And many of them did the same thing. Now, are they highly intellectual, those who come to Australia during that period of time? As far as I'm concerned, and what I've been, those who I've been witnessing, what I'm seeing, are usually not the highly educated people. I'm not sure why, but not really, really high. Maybe the working class, and usually the working class. So I think the working class are usually taking the risk. My parents and many of them who arrived to Australia have struggled a lot. But what they do know, because they entered the beginning phase of the recession, which is like 16%, 70% of interest rate. Houses were cheap, but interest rate was very high. So even though the country was going downhill, Bob Hawke was openly spread his arm out and accept Chinese people. And after that, that's when the Yugoslavia, that's when Bosnians came in, and that's how it goes. And yeah, that's what I could say. If it wasn't for Bob Hawke, my family and many Chinese wouldn't come to Australia during that time of period. We would have opened a lot of Chinese restaurants, fast food takeaway. We would have a lot of difference. We would have changed a lot of cultures. So yeah, that's the video. I'd like to share my thoughts, and just the beginning of the video, just to show you guys, what's happened this year. So, when I get older, I can look back in this video.